Hi, welcome back. We're going to make a new objective for level 2. In level 1, our objective was to defeat a certain amount of enemies, and then our player would progress to the next stage. But in layout 2, imagine that you just want to have a doorway, and if your character gets to the doorway, then they move to the next room or the next layout. Let's learn how we can create a door. What we're going to do is we're going to start on layer 0, and we're going to right-click, and we're going to insert a new object. This object's going to be a sprite, and I'm just going to call it door. Now what we're going to create is just a square of color. This will be kind of a temporary placeholder for where the door is, so make it any color you want. And ultimately, the player's not going to see this in the game, so the color doesn't really matter. But imagine that this is a doorway, and we're going to place that doorway somewhere on the screen. Maybe it's a doorway in a wall, or maybe it's simply an area that they have to get to somewhere on the screen to transport to the next stage. Now, in my layout, I have this long horizontal hallway, so I can imagine that if my player gets all the way to the end of the hallway and walks off this side of the screen, maybe it takes them to the next space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch out my square to cover up that end of the hallway and just kind of place it right there at the end. Now, what we can do is we can create a system in the event sheet 2 that when our player touches the doorway, it transports them to the next layout. Let's add an event here. And the reason why I'm adding the event in the event sheet 2 and not the core event sheet is because I want this stuff to only apply to level 2. It shouldn't apply to all the levels because this is level 2 specific, so I'm doing it in the level 2 event sheet. What we're going to do is go down to our main character, and I'm going to use on collision with another object. And the object that I'm going to choose is the door. So when my player and the door collide, then we can add an action, go to System, and then go to Layout. Now we haven't made a level 3 yet. There is no Layout 3. We can do that. But for now, let's just say it stays in Layout 2. It'll go back to the other side of the hallway. We'll change that later, but that'll work for now. Now that will work if we test it out. If our player moves to the space where we've put the doorway, as soon as we touch the doorway, we're in the next layout. But we can make that feel a little bit more smooth. Now, for our first level, we added all this stuff as soon as the player hit the condition, right? As soon as they defeated the right amount of enemies. We added a message that popped up that said, congratulations, level completed. We froze the player's movement. We waited 4 seconds before we went to the next level. That's a lot. That made sense for when the objective was to defeat all the enemies because it feels like a victory. But in something like this, when you simply just touched a doorway, if you have to wait 4 seconds and a big message pops up that says congratulations, that's going to feel very weird. It's going to feel out of place, and it's going to be kind of annoying because it takes so long. So we don't want to add all that extra stuff. What we do want to add is maybe just a simple fade. So the screen fades to black when you get to the doorway, and when it fades back in, you're in the next level. Let's learn how to add a fade to our game. To do that, we're going to add a new layer in our layer window. I'm going to right-click down here in the layers. I'm going to add a layer at the top. I'm going to call this layer Fade. And I'm going to put an object in the Fade layer. It's going to be a sprite, and I can call this object Fade 2. It's going to be my Fade object, and it's just going to be a big black square. You can actually fill it with a color. If you want to fade your game to like red or something, you could. I'm going to use black because it's more traditional. And this square, I'm going to stretch it out so that it covers up the entire layout. Now you might be thinking that's very annoying because now you can't see your layout anymore. You can actually make it invisible. Any layer that we have in our layer window, if you uncheck the blue checkbox next to it, it just kind of turns that layer off. Now it's still in the game. It doesn't affect the gameplay at all. It just affects like the level editor. So if it's getting in the way, you can just uncheck it and not worry about it. But let's leave it checked for now because we're going to have to add some behaviors to this fade. Let's go over to the behaviors. We're going to add a new behavior, and we're going to add the fade behavior. In fact, we're going to add 2 fade behaviors. Now we want to have 2 because the first one's going to be a fade in, and the second one's going to be a fade out. In fact, we can actually name them. I'm going to call this one fade in, and I'll call this one fade out. That makes it a little bit easier to keep track of. Once you have the 2 fade behaviors added, you'll see them over here on the left panel. Now let's talk about what these options are, because we're going to have to set these up to work in the way that we want them to work. For each fade, so for example, for fade in, there's an option for fade in time. That's how long it'll take it for the sprite to appear. The wait time is how long it'll sit on the screen, and then the fade out time is how long it'll take to fade back out. Destroy means that it'll destroy itself at the end of the fade out. And enabled means that it'll happen as soon as the object is created. We want to change a lot of this stuff. Let's start with a fade in. Now you might be thinking this is called fade in, so the fade in time should be something more than 0. And that's actually a little counterintuitive, because it's opposite of what you think. When the black square that we've created fades in, then the game is kind of fading out, right? Because the level is getting covered up by black. So our fade in behavior is actually going to be a fade out time. If that's confusing, don't worry about it. What you want to set up here is just for the fade in time is going to be 0, the wait time is going to be 0, and the fade out time is going to be 1. Now we don't want it to destroy itself because we want to reuse this fade. So I'm going to uncheck the destroy box. For enabled, I can leave it enabled. And the reason why is because if you keep that enabled, as soon as the level starts, the fade in will happen. It'll be a nice kind of transition as you begin a new level. So we're going to keep the enabled check on fade in. Now let's go to fade out. For fade out, we want to actually have the fade in time be 1, because as the game fades out, we want the black to fade in. The wait time can be 0, and the fade out time is going to be 0. We don't want it to fade back out. We can uncheck destroy. Again, we don't want it to destroy itself. And for the fade out, we don't want it to start enabled either, because we don't want the game to fade out at the beginning. We want it to fade out at the end. So we'll not have enabled check for now, and we'll start it when we want to start it. So you can set up these settings in the same way you see them here. Now, we can uncheck that blue checkbox next to the fade layer, get rid of it so we can't see it, and let's go over to our event sheet and let's add an event, let's add an action to the event that we have with the character colliding with the door. We're going to go to fade. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the fade out. If you go scroll about halfway down, you'll see a fade in and a fade out section. We want to start the fade out. And we're going to drag that up before go to layout. So when I touch the door, the game starts to fade out, and then it goes to layout 2. Now, right now, the game is too fast. It'll go to layout 2 before the fade out has actually really even happened. So I'm going to add a wait in between those. I'm going to add action, go to system, go down to wait, and I'm going to wait 1 second in between those two. So the fade out happens for a second, waits 1 second, and then it goes to layout 2. Let's try it out. Touch the door, fades out, next level fades in. Looks great. You can adjust the times too. If you want the fade out to be quicker or slower, you can do that. Just click on your fade and you can change the numbers here. Like I like to go with a 0.5, and I can change this wait time to 0.5 for a quicker fade. You can play around with that, find a number that feels good for your game. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about here is we need to have something that tells the player where this doorway is. We're going to add a sprite that represents the door. Now, if you've already created the sprite, great. If you haven't created a sprite for a door, don't worry about this yet. Come back to it later. What I'm going to do is go to layer 0. I'm going to right click, insert a new object. It's going to be a sprite, and I'll call this, I'm going to call it door sprite, because I've already called the yellow box door. So I'll call this one door sprite. You can call it whatever you want. And I have this door that I've made. Cool. It's pretty big. Let me make that a little smaller. Now imagine this door is somewhere in our level. Maybe it's like right here. And our player simply has to get to that door and touch it to go on to the next space. Now this yellow box is kind of like a trigger, right? Whenever they touch it, they'll go to that next space. So I can use this yellow box as basically like just a way of testing to see if my player is overlapping with the door or not. So I can take that yellow box, just stick it right behind the door. Now, as soon as my player walks up, touches the door, they'll be overlapping on top of the yellow box and they'll go to the next level. In fact, if we're doing it that way, I like to take that yellow box and move it to the boundaries layer. That way I can see it still. it's not actually hidden behind the doorway. I could see it right in front of the doorway. So if you do have a door sprite, think about using that yellow box as a trigger to test to see if your character has touched the door. Now, because I've added a new sprite for the door in here, I want to add that to the family so that the Z order works. Whenever I add a new sprite, I want to go over to Family 1, Edit Family, and add that door sprite in. That way the Z order works so my player can move in front of it. Let's try it. Now I see that yellow box there, and that's kind of annoying, but it does work. Let's make that yellow box invisible. I'm going to go to the core event sheet. I'm going to add an event and go to my door, and I'm going to say that when the door is created, I'm going to add an action and set the door to invisible. Good. Now let's go back to layout 2, try it out. There's my portal, jump through it, go to the next level. Looks good. Now say, for example, you don't want to have this door sprite. I'm going to get rid of it. And instead you just have an area off screen that you want the character to go to. Maybe they just have to walk off the side of the screen. You can do that too. I would say for that though, just make sure that the player knows where to go. If that's the situation, then I might add a sprite of just like an arrow. I'm going to say direction arrow. And I'm going to put in a sprite of just like a big arrow so my player knows which direction to go. And I can just stick that right there so that as my player is running through the level, there's an arrow here telling them to go this direction. Perfect. So that's how we can create doors. We'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you guys next time.